Good morning. Welcome to our Sunday adult class. We are continuing in our study of First Kings, and I'm going to bring up the slide deck here. Hope everyone's doing great and enjoying our journey through First Kings and the Old Testament. We are studying First Kings 16 and 17 for our session today, and just a couple of things we want to cover. Make sure I get it. There we go. I always try to let everyone know about really amazing archaeological, physical finds that are constantly being discovered in the state of Israel and beyond within the Middle East. And I wanted, again, I think I might have mentioned the last session that recently in the south of the Negev, they have discovered some very compelling potsherds. And on those potsherds, there is listed literally the name Baal, scourge of the Midianites. And if you read your book of Judges, and you get into the Gideon cycle, that is the other name of Gideon. And they have carbon dated, fortunately, the paint and the textures put on the pottery shards can be very accurately carbon dated, and it fits perfectly in the 1200 to 1100, in fact, 1220 to 1180 BCE time frame, which would be perfect as our scriptures describe Gideon and his adventures as a judge of Israel. So wanted you to be aware of that. That's some exciting news coming out of Israel. And again, the material evidence and the material, how do you refute that? You could say, well, there's just a lot of Jerubaals running around at that time, the scourge of Midian, and that's literally what the text says. Very, very encouraging. Getting on to our class today, we have transitioned from a united, very effective and powerful kingdom. It was formative under Saul. It expanded rapidly under wars of conquest under David. It came together and fused together as a very powerful geo-economic and political unit under Solomon. And unfortunately, now it's unraveled. And so we are in the era, and will be this way until both Israel first, and then secondly, Judah are taken into exile by the greater Middle Eastern powers. And so you have the separation now. And so a much smaller kingdom of Judah, a bit larger kingdom of Israel, and now all of these former countries or states that were under subjugation, Philistia, Phoenicia, Aram, Ammon, Moab, Edom, are now independent, and they will vex both of these kingdoms as literally the monarchy of the two kingdoms fights for its very survival. And I will try to blow this up a bit. It's a little hard to see. Sorry about that. But as you can see, we have the two lines now of the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, and the split comes, of course, at Solomon with Jeroboam, which we read earlier. His son did not last long. In fact, an official raised up in a palace coup, Baasha, and he took over that line, and he will produce one son, and then we're going to read certainly of the house of Omri. And then on the line of David, Rehoboam will have other sons, and these kings will be good sometimes. Most of the time they'll be a mess, like the kings of Israel, but occasionally there will be some good kings of Judah. And so it's basically a tragedy. The entire United Kingdom is split, and there will be two storylines that go through the First Kings narrative. Let me back down again. What's critical and what really makes Judah, the kingdom of Judah, unique is, of course, Jerusalem, 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 sorry, and certainly the beautiful temple that Solomon has built. All this time, we believe the temple functions. It is the other corrupt acts that go on, depending on the king of Judah. Solomon let his other wives also bring their cultic gods in to the Temple Mount and worship their gods in Jerusalem. And of course, that led right to the split spiritually. Very important, I try to always bring forward good material evidence. And this is called the Moabite Misha Stele. And it indicates, it will be in our narrative today, that a person named Omri expanded his holdings to include northern Moab east of the Jordan River. It makes reference to the oppression of Moab by Omri, king of Israel. And this is a very important historical fact. We read it in our biblical narrative, but here again we see this once again being shown as very hard evidence, very hard fact. Israel would later become identified in sources as the house of Omri, Beit Omriah, with the term Israel being used less and less as history progressed. The other defining term for Israel is Samaria, beginning in the reign of Joash. It's also known as Shomron in the Hebrew, or Samaria. And so setting up for our read of the narrative today, you have Israel, you have Judah, and this is very specifically what's going on in the chapters that we're going to look at. Omri will conquer, and he will usurp what Baasha had taken from Jeroboam. He will have a son, Ahab, and that son will form a political alliance with a very powerful king of Tyre, and that daughter, Jezebel, infamous Jezebel, will become his wife. And that will lead to the emergence of the very, very capable, very powerful, very forceful early prophets of Israel, and prophets as we really think of them, Elijah, Elisha. And so we'll be looking at this lineage, and of course, at the same time, Israel is having its issues. Judah is also having its issues, and we will look constantly at the bloodlines, if you will. I want to introduce again. We've talked about the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a Levant, meaning people from the Near East. They were very prosperous. They were the sea trading power through most of the Bronze Age, and once the Minoans had been conquered, the Phoenicians really took over. And as the slide deck says, the Phoenicians by 1000 BCE established ports, warehouses, markets, and settlements all across the Mediterranean up to the southern Black Sea. Colonies were established on Cyprus, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, Sicily, Malta, the coast of North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula, which is today both Spain and Portugal. Tyre rose to become the richest and most powerful Phoenician city-state, particularly during the reign of Hiram I. That is the great king that introduced to David the alliance that Solomon later also agreed to, 969, 936, and during the reign of the priest Baal, and 887 to 856. And it is this priest, Baal, who usurps the throne and becomes the king of Tyre, that will be the focus of the narrative today. Tyre expanded its territories as far as north as Beirut and down to Cyprus. And so it had this huge network of trading. Later, it is the colonists or the heritage or the descendants of the Tyrrhenians that will form the great Carthaginian Empire that the Romans will battle through the 3 Punic Wars. And they were a vast and highly civilized, very sophisticated civilization. Baal was their chief deity, Ishtar, his consort, and Baal was known as Melkor, Baal Melkor. And very specifically, he would take on the form of the bull. And there would be continued child sacrifices. It would continue with the Phoenicians, and it would be transferred onto their colonies, particularly Carthage. And up until the time of the Romans, the continued practice of child sacrifice would occur. And so on the dark side, the Phoenicians had a very brutal spiritual or religious practice. On the upside, they were tremendous merchants, and they literally have given us our alphabet. Our alphabet is called the Phoenician alphabet. Why? Because the Greeks, who were also traders, realized that it was a very simple script, much less complex than Linear B, and they could, and so they co-opted. And so Phoenician script came into Greek literature, or the writing, and that, of course, came right into our Greco-Roman and then on to English today. So we use a Phoenician script that the Greco-Romans used, and it started with the Phoenicians. Pretty amazing. Just again about the Phoenicians, talking about this Ithabal. Once his realm reached its greatest territorial extent, Ithabal declared himself king of the Sidonians, a title that would be mentioned in the Jewish accounts, and it is. The late Iron Age saw the height of Phoenician shipping, mercantile, and cultural activity, particularly between 750 and 650 BCE. They literally pumped tremendous high-value goods throughout the entire Mediterranean, and then back to the great empires of Assyria, Babylon, later even Persia. Phoenician influence was visible in the orientalizing of Greek culture. We talked about the alphabet, but it also affected the way that the Greeks made their pottery and the way they had their textiles, and especially, above all, the ability to dye with a secret formula that the Phoenicians had, deep, rich purple. This was one of the most sought after colors for royalty, and even to the time of the Romans, much sought after. And it was the Phoenicians that had the monopoly on that. Later in the scriptures, we'll hear of Paul finding Lydia, a dealer or merchant in purple. Purple dye. And so that would be whether she was from a heritage standpoint of a Phoenician line, or she had picked up the trade, very, very prosperous. And you're dealing with the most wealthy people. Homer's Iliad, which was composed during this period, references the quality of Phoenician clothing and metal goods. They were the, I can't remember the high-end catalogs these days, but I mean, if you wanted something, if you were the king of Assyria and you wanted something really nice, you went to the Phoenicians. They could get it for you and get it to you, kind of like the Amazon of the late Bronze, early Iron Age. And then finally, Ethabal was born in 915 BCE, the son of a man named Aharam, originally a priest of Ashtaroth. This explains why his daughter Jezebel was so zealous in the promotion in Israel of the Phoenician gods. Ethbaal assassinated the king of Tyre, named Phelas at the time, and took the throne at age 36. He expanded the kingdom of Tyre to include all of Phoenicia, which included Sidon, for which he is known from the Bible as the Lord of Sidon, or the Sidonians. Ethbaal also was responsible for the establishment of new colonies such as Botris, Batrim, Byblos, Azu in Libya, and then on eventually to Carthage much later. And so that's a nice overview of the Phoenicians. It kind of sets us up on what is happening in our narrative. I'm going to bring us over to the narrative so we can enjoy what the scriptures tell us. And so we are in 1 Kings 16. It says the word of Adonai came to Yehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha. And remember, Baasha took the kingdom away from Jeroboam's son. I raised you up out of the dust and made you prince over my people Israel. But you have lived in the same way as Jeroboam, that's Jeroboam, and caused my people Israel to sin, so that their sinning has made me angry. Therefore, I will sweep away Baasha and his house completely. I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, that's Jeroboam. If someone from the line of Baasha dies in the city, the dogs will eat him. That's terrible. If he dies in the countryside, the vultures will eat him. Wow. Other activities of Baasha, his accomplishments, and his power are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. And we'll hear this over and over again in the narrative of First Kings. It will be referencing other source material that redactor, that editor is picking up, and he wants you to know there's other material out there. He was a good editor, and that his knowledge is based not just on his own source material, but that of others. That's very important. So it's the annals of the king of Israel. Baasha slept with his ancestors, and Elah, his son, became king in his place. Through the prophet Yehu, the son of Hanani, the word of Adonai was proclaimed against Baasha and his house, both because he did so much evil from Adonai's perspective, angered him, and with his actions became like the house of Jeroboam, and because he killed Nadav. Now, we're not sure exactly what that means, but he was bad. He was a bad guy. Here we go. It was in the 26th year of Asa. Now we're going to shift over to Judah. Asa, king of Yehuda, that Elah, the son of Baasha, began his reign over all Israel in Tirzah. And he ruled 2 years, not very long. His servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, plotted against him. Finally, one time when Elah was in Tirzah, drinking himself senseless in the house of Arza, administrator of the palace at Tirzah, Zimri entered, struck him down, and killed him. This was in the 27th year of Asa, king of Yehuda. Zimri then took Elah's place as king. So you have this very tiny moment when Zimri is the king of Israel. At the beginning of his reign, as soon as he took over the throne, he killed off the entire house of Baasha, as prophesied. He left not a single male, neither of his relatives nor his friends. Thus Zimri eliminated all the house of Baasha, in keeping with the word of Adonai spoken against Baasha through Yehu the prophet. This word had been spoken because of all of Baasha's sins and the sins of Elah, his son, and which they committed, and with which they had made Israel sin, thereby angering Adonai, the God of Israel, with their worthless idols. Other activities of Elah and his accomplishments, which I don't think was much, he didn't live that long, are recorded in the annals of the king of Israel, again referencing that other source material. Okay, so Israel's a mess, one king after another, boom, boom, boom. Here we go again. Now it was in the 27th year of Asa, king of Yehuda, that Zimri ruled for 7 days. There you go, at Tirzah. At that time, the army was besieging Gibton, which belonged to the Plishtim, or the Philistines. The troops in the camp heard it, said that Zimri had plotted and killed the king. Whereupon that same day, there in the camp, all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel. Omri and all Israel with him withdrew from Gibton and besieged Tirzah. When Zimri saw that the city had been captured, he went into the citadel of the royal palace and burned down the royal palace over him, so that he died. That's a rough way to end your life, but he chose that. This came about because of the sins he had committed in doing what was evil from Adonai's perspective, and living as Jeroboam had lived, and in sinning by making Israel sin. Now, he was only king for 7 days, so one could say, how did that all happen? But he was the commander of Baasha for those years, and so he was complicit in whatever that king was doing. Other activities of Zimri and his conspiracy are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel, again citing the other source material. At this point, the people of Israel divided into 2 factions. Half the people went after Tibni, the son of Ginat, to make him king, while the other followed Omri. But the faction supporting Omri won out over that of Tibni, the son of Ginat. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. It was in the 31st year of Asa, king of Yehuda, that Omri began his reign over Israel, and he ruled for 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah. He bought Mount Shomron from Shamir for 132 pounds of silver. On the mountain he built a city, which he named Shomron, after Shamir, who had owned the mountain. And Shomron is a Hebrew for Samaria. And so he decides to move the capital, but you get the flavor of what's going on in Israel. One guy rules for a while, he's knocked out by another palace coup, he rules for a while, another, and all the while there's good old King Asa of Judah just quietly doing good. And there's stability in Judah. There's no stability right now in Israel. Omri did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, outdoing all his predecessors in wickedness. Wow. So he's the worst of the worst so far. For he lived entirely in the manner of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, committing the sins with which he made Israel sin, thereby angering Adonai, the God of Israel, with their worthless idols. Other activities of Omri, the power he demonstrated, are recorded in the Annals of the Kings of Israel. Then Omri slept with his ancestors and was buried in Shomron. And Akav, his son, became king in his place. Akav, or Ahab, as it's pronounced in English or transliterated, is who we're talking about. It was in the 38th year of Asa, king of Yehuda, that Akav, the son of Omri, began his rule over Israel. Akav, the son of Omri, ruled 22 years. That's a long time so far for kings of Israel. And Shomron. Akav, the son of Omri, did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, outdoing all his predecessors in weakness. So if Omri was bad, the son's even worse. But then, as if it had been a trifling thing for him to commit the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took as his wife Isabel, or Jezebel, the daughter of Baal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So among all the other things that he did, he introduced to his wife this pernicious Phoenician cult worship of Bel Malchor. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Shomron. So he flat out goes for it, builds a temple. He's going to get all of Israel to follow Baal Melchor. Akav also set up the Asherah, that's the consort of Baal. And Akav did more to anger Adonai, the God of Israel, than all the kings of Israel preceding him. It was during this time that Hiel of Bet-El rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of his firstborn son, Avram, and he erected the gates at the cost of his youngest son, Seguf. This was in keeping with the word of Adonai spoken through Joshua, the son of Nun. So way back in the time of Joshua, you have this prophecy that Jericho will not be rebuilt without the cost of somebody's sons. And that's what happens in the time of in the time of Ahab and the time of Asa, king of Judah. Let's look at 17. Eliyahu, here we go, also known as Elijah. Eliyahu from Tishbe, an inhabitant of Gilad, said to Akav, that's Ahab, as Adonai, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there will be neither rain nor dew in the years ahead unless I say so. That is a prophet of God. Then the word of Adonai came to him, leave here, turn to the east, hide in the Vadi Crete, near the Yarden. You are to drink from the stream, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there. Very interesting. So he went and acted according to the word of Adonai, and he went and he lived in Vadi Crete near the Yarden. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. He drank from the stream. After a while, the stream dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of Adonai came to him, get up, go to Zarephath, a village in Sidon, and live there. I have ordered a widow there to provide for you. Now, wait a minute. Sidon, the Sidonians, this is the heartland of Jezebel's country. Get up, go to Zarephath, a village in Sidon, and live there. I've ordered a widow there to provide for you. That's crazy. So he set out and went to Zarephath. On reaching the gate of the city, he saw a widow there gathering sticks and called out to her, please bring a little water in a container for me to drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. She answered, This is very interesting. As Adonai your God lives, wait a minute, they just met. She's a Sidonian, she's a Phoenician. As Adonai your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a pot and a little oil in the jug. Here I am gathering a couple of sticks of wood so that I can go and cook it for myself and my son. After we have eaten that, we will die. That's man, you talk about being at your wit's end. She's ready to give up. Eliyahu said to her, don't be afraid. Go and do what you said. But first, use a little of it to make me a small loaf of bread. Bring it to me. After that, make food for yourself and your son. For this is what Adonai, the God of Israel, says. The pot of meal will not get used up, nor will there fail to be oil in the jug until the day Adonai sends rain down on the land. She went and acted according to what Eliyahu had said, and she and her household had food to eat for a long time. The pot of meal did not get used up, nor did there fail to be oil in the jug, in the fulfillment of the word of Adonai spoken through Eliyahu. A while later, the son, whose house it was, fell ill. His illness grew increasingly serious until his breathing stopped. She said to Eliyahu, what do you have against me, you man of God? Did you come to me just to remind me of how sinful I am by killing my son? Give me your son, he said to her. Taking him from her lap, he carried him into the room upstairs where he was staying, laid him on his bed, and then he cried out, Adonai, Adonai my God, you have also brought this misery on the widow I'm staying with by killing her son? That's pretty forward prayer to God. He stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to Adonai, Adonai my God, please let this child's soul come back into him. That's very interesting. Adonai heard Eliyahu's cry. The child's soul came back into him and he revived. This is the first time in Scripture that we specifically see the passing of a spirit under God's guidance out of the body through natural death, or in this case, for whatever reason, medical condition. God commanding that soul to go back into a body or to resurrect, if you will. This is why Eliyahu is regarded as one of the greatest prophets of all, because he, not he himself, but he working, or I should say Adonai working through him, brought about resurrection. Adonai heard Eliyahu's cry, the child's soul came back into him and he revived. Eliyahu took the child, brought him down from the upstairs room into the house, and gave him to his mother. What a rejoicing that was. And Eliyahu said, see, your son is alive. The woman replied to Eliyahu, now I know that you are a man of God, and the word of Adonai that you speak is the truth. And this is very important because this sets up something that we'll see in the Gospels. Jesus will raise people literally from the dead. If you can, in your study this week, go to John chapter 11 and look how he raised Lazarus from the dead. This is one of the hallmarks of Jesus' signs and wonders proving that he was the Messiah of God. What amazing storylines we have covered today. Please take time to reread it. Please take time to think about, wow, a Sidonian woman steeped in the culture of the Phoenicians, in the heartland of Jezebel, of Bel Melchor and Ashtoreth, recognizes Adonai, the God of Israel, and she clings to him in faith. And because of that, her son lives. Amazing story as always. We appreciate so much everybody's participation in this class. Hopefully this is encouraging to you, and we'll continue as always in our study. And until next week, thank you so much. Take care.